Welcome to Therapeutics Unlocked, the inaugural Sick Cells Therapeutics Conference. I'm Jamie Dornfeld, Chief of Staff and Operations at Sick Cells, and I'm so proud to see this community, warriors, caregivers, researchers, clinicians, advocates, policymakers, and industry partners together in one space. To our sickle cell warriors and caregivers, thank you for being the heart of this work. Your stories guide every conversation we have. To our community steering committee and our partners across sectors, your collaboration made this conference possible. And to our sponsors, thank you for investing in a future where innovation meets impact. We are living in a remarkable moment for sickle cell disease. Advances in gene therapy and new treatment modalities are reshaping what's possible, but only if we ensure that innovation is paired with trust, education, and access. That's what Therapeutics Unlocked is all about. Over the course of the day, we'll explore the entire ecosystem of therapeutics, from clinical trial design and patient education to coverage, policy, and holistic care. Each session builds on a single truth. Science moves forward when people do. Our discussions will go beyond the lab to lived experiences. How patients make decisions about trials, how policy can either open or close doors, and how comprehensive care must include both body and mind. These aren't separate conversations. They're parts of the same journey toward equity, empowerment, and better outcomes. At Sick Cells, we believe that systemic change begins with listening and acting on what patients tell us matters most, whether it's simplifying the path to participation in a trial, improving follow-up care, or ensuring that coverage decisions reflect real lives. Today, we are unlocking the barriers that stand between discovery and delivery. This conference represents more than information sharing. It's about momentum. By bringing together science, policy, and community, we're showing that advancing therapeutics isn't just a medical challenge, it's a moral one. My hope is that each of us leaves with one new partnership that makes your work stronger, one actionable takeaway you can apply right away, and one renewed commitment to ensuring that progress reaches every person living with sickle cell disease. Thank you for being here and for the passion, rigor, and empathy you bring to this movement. Together, we are building a future where innovation and access go hand in hand. It's now my honor to introduce the visionary who made this gathering possible, Ashley Valentine, co-founder and CEO of Sick Cells. Ashley founded Sick Cells with her late brother, Marcus, to elevate the voices of those living with sickle cell disease and to challenge the inequities that have too long defined their care. What began as a storytelling initiative has grown into a national advocacy powerhouse, bridging community lived experience with policy, research, and industry impact. Under Ashley's leadership, Sick Cells has influenced national coverage discussions, strengthened community capacity, and inspired hundreds of advocates to speak up, share their stories, and shape the future of therapeutics. She reminds us that true innovation starts not in a lab or a legislature, but in listening to the people most affected. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ashley Valentine.
Good morning. Great. So I'm going to share some stories with you today about chelation therapy. So for those who don't know, my name is Ashley Valentine. I am a co-founder of Sick Cells, but the other co-founder, and in my opinion, the more important co-founder, is my late and great brother, Marcus Valentine. And I want to tell you a few stories about how our family navigated sickle cell growing up in the 90s and the 2000s. And my family is my mom, my dad, my brother, and Kevin Valentine, my oldest brother. But sickle cell did shape our entire lives. It felt normal. It was our life. And we lived with the treatments required to keep my brother here for 36 years. So growing up, we spent a lot of time in hospitals. In 1983, when Marcus was born, awareness about sickle cell was low. In fact, my parents were screened for sickle cell trait prior to starting a family. My mom, being a nurse and a healthcare professional, she knew that she was a carrier, but my dad was told he was not. Back then, there was hemoglobin electrophoresis test. However, there was also that blood smear that looked for sickle cell trait. So when you got a blood smear, it was up to the phlebotomist to accurately read if you were a carrier or not. And in my dad's case, he was told he wasn't. It wasn't until he was rescreened many years later with the electrophoresis that, in fact, he is a carrier and he has 46% hemoglobin S. Also, there weren't treatment options outside of prophylactics, penicillin, folic acid, and hospitalizations to treat the pain crisis, infections, acute chest. So we spent a lot of time in hospitals. The hospitals became part of our core community. Our music lessons, our extracurriculars, dinners, shopping, all happened near the city. While we lived in the suburbs, I spent many years on the L train with my dad riding back and forth around Chicago or driving the 37 miles back and forth into the city from our home. The hospital playrooms knew me and Marcus very well. Unfortunately, that wasn't the same experience for my oldest brother, Kevin, because when Kevin was in hospitals with Marcus, they still thought that sickle cell was contagious and a version of HIV. So they wouldn't invite him to the playroom parties. In one instance, he was specifically told this playroom party is for the cancer patients. That made him cry. For me, though, as a baby and 5 years younger, that wasn't my experience. I never experienced that part of discrimination in hospitals. My parents were able to block me from it. However, school was a different story. When Marcus was in third grade, around 1990, he was hospitalized repeatedly for acute chest syndrome, infection, and anemia and pain. He spent months in and out of the hospitals and was at really high risk for dying. With no treatments for sickle cell disease at the time, the doctor suggested that my parents start Marcus on chronic blood transfusions. You can see he missed nearly 80 days of school in his third or second grade report card here, and he was late 32 times. Now, here's the thing. We move as a family. Wherever Marcus went, the rest of us followed. Since Marcus was missing so much school, that meant so were Kevin and I. While I don't have pictures of our report cards, you can imagine our attendance, what it looked like. My mom recalls that some of the teachers and administrators were compassionate and others weren't. Kevin, being a little bit older, he was able to carpool, ride with neighbors, and eventually even drive himself to school. With Kevin, they were able to ensure he didn't miss school. The Andersons, Miss Charlotte, Mr. Casey, and some cousins took Kevin in during nighttime emergencies and to all his school-related activities. He still missed field trips, but him being older, he had some independence. Me, on the other hand, traveled very closely with my parents. I was marked tardy over and over and over and over again. With all the tardiness, it required parent-teacher conferences, which then required my parents to miss work, which already was an issue for them. Dad got fired from a few jobs, and Mom often took leave without pay. My parents would send written notes with me because every time I was tardy, I was sent to the office. My mom went as far as to teach the school about sickle cell and stroke prevention to help them understand what we were going through. In fact, her second job was part-time school nurse because otherwise the schools wouldn't let me and Marcus go on field trips. While these stories are being told to me, as a kid, I remember never feeling scared, never feeling tired, never feeling worried about sickle cell. Much of that is because of the support system we had built into our neighborhood. And for me, those memories are of the moms. So I did get all of this cleared because some of you know our Director of Operations, Abby Tainter. The Tainers are our family, friends, and neighbors. Mrs. Tainter and my mom are basically sisters, and they co-parented us when we grew up on the block. The two moms couldn't be more different, but found sisterhood. The things that drew the moms together and kept them bounded were their obsessions with coffee, sporadicness to try new things, and their unconditional love for both of their children. When I was little, in the early 90s, I recall one morning being awakened by Mrs. Tainter. She whispered in a sing-song voice, "Good morning, Ashley." My dad had been on the night shifts at the post office and in the only working car. Marcus was really sick and declining in front of my mom's eyes. She called Mrs. Tainter, who drove her 20 miles into Chicago to take Marcus to the hospital. Then Mrs. Tainter came back to the block and stayed in our house with me and Kevin until Dad could get off work. This was pre-cell phones. So once the call was made into my dad's job that this was happening, rest was left into Faith's hands and the mom's hands. The Tainers knew sickle cell as intimately as we did. During long hospitalizations, I spent nights at the Tainers. While my parents were in Chicago monitoring Marcus, I was doing Spice Girl dances with the Tainter girls, Tanya and Abby, also known as the twins, and their extended mirror and their little house on River Drive. Even more than the disease, the moms supported each other, often carrying the burden of the world so that the other could rest. When Marcus started blood transfusions in 1992, our quality of life changed. Every month, Marcus would receive a unit of blood since his body was producing only sickle cells, leading to all of these severe complications. You can see from the report cards that Marcus's energy was coming back. He was also able to get a sinus surgery, which helped curb those repeat infections. He started to gain weight, and what we didn't know at the time was that this was also preventing more strokes. What my parents later learned while preparing Marcus for the sinus surgery was that he was likely having strokes during that period too. They found silent infarcts on all of his pre-surgical scans. And if you look at the teacher notes, you can see that Marcus needed improvement in writing and spelling. My mom also noticed that by the time Marcus reached the 5th grade, he'd forgotten how to tell time and spell words that he previously could. Keep in mind that this was before the STOP trial. This was before that trial, which ran from 1995 to 1997. And as a result of that trial, now TCD scans are routine for children living with sickle cell for stroke prevention. But due to the other more visible complications of sickle cell disease, they started Marcus on those blood transfusions. There we go. While the blood transfusions improved our overall quality of life, chelation was my new family norm. So I brought some props. So with a show of hands, how many people know what that picture is on the left? There's a few, and I still have it right here. Okay, so what I want to say is because of innovation in drug development, most of you will never know what syringe drivers are. So I'm here to tell you about them. With every treatment, especially those not specifically developed for your disease, there's side effects. Blood transfusions not only pour healthy red blood cells into your body to feed your organs, to reduce anemia, to prevent stroke and infection, but with every unit of blood, it also dumps iron into the body. Too much iron in the body causes a condition called iron overload, which is fatal. It leads to visible discoloration in the skin due to iron buildup. It eventually leads to liver, heart, and lung failure. The treatment to pull excessive iron from the body was Desferal, which is still used today. But back then, it was only available in a powder form that you had to prepare with sterile water solution and administer through a 12-hour infusion. The infusions required the person to be poked with a needle each and every night. The needle needed to stay in place the entire time. The medicine needed to absorb into fat and often didn't absorb at all. The side effects of the chelators was hearing loss, blindness. They left hard keloids underneath the skin. However, the alternative was iron overload, and Marcus needed the blood transfusions to prevent death. So, weighing their options, my parents went with blood transfusions and the nightly chelation routine. There we go. Now my mom, who's sitting right there and nodding at me every time I'm saying something correct, my mom made the nightly chelations a family activity. During these nightly chelations, when the hour came to poke Marcus with the needle, we would heat his hips with homemade hot packs to soften the skin. I had the responsibility of making the hot packs in the microwave with a wet towel and plastic bags. On some nights, we had too much energy. We'd slap each other with the hot packs and sometimes chase each other around the house. On nights like those, my mom's patience was very thin, and she'd catch us with sharp eyes, daring us to move. After Marcus would warm his hips, we'd wash our hands for a full minute and begin sterilizing the table and prep for the chelation. Unfortunately, in the 80s, prior to Marcus starting chronic blood transfusions, he received contaminated blood. He was in a hospital that wasn't our home hospital, and a result of that was that he contracted hepatitis C. My mom recalls being told this through a letter and being left swimming in a sea of what next. Fortunately, the hep C stayed dormant for Marcus his entire life. However, we had to be extra careful with the at-home chelations as a result. No matter how much safety you teach or instill, accidents still happen. My mom recalls that one morning we were in a rush trying to avoid tardiness getting to school. She heard me yelp and start crying from the other room. Marcus and I were playing in his room that morning. Marcus, distracted, de-accessed himself and left his chelation needle sitting on the couch. I sat on it. In that moment, Mom comforted me, reminded Marcus about safety, but then had to send us to school. While I never contracted hep C, out of abundance of caution, I had repeat blood draws for most of my life and was tested for hep C, and our entire family has been vaccinated for hep B. This also translates into more missed days from school, more missed days from work, more tardiness, and more visits to the school nurse where my mom was having to explain what to see if her youngest daughter starts to fall ill because she's contracted Hep C. Now, as that result, we had to use sterile technique as our at-home safety protocols every night when we were doing those chelations. Now, my mom would make this fun. She'd give us all a pair of gloves and a mask. The gloves would flop over my teeny tiny fingers, but I felt so official, being allowed to wear all the surgical gear just like Mom and Marcus. Mom would wipe down the dining room table with alcohol. She'd lay out all the tools for the chelation to help Marcus. Marcus would read all the labels out loud and follow her verbal guidance while shuffling through the giant medicine cabinet the size of a fridge. Mom used this time to tell each of us how the medications worked and how to read the labels, helping Marcus sound out words on the bottles and correcting his pronunciation along the way. I usually sat in a chair, dressed like a kid surgeon, mouthing the words back to myself as they went through the literary exercise. Each night, we'd gather one Tegaderm, one small vial of Desferal, a butterfly needle, a regular needle, and a vial of sterile water. My mom would rhythmically prepare these infusions. She'd rip some alcohol swabs open and set them aside. She'd then open the sterile needle and screw the sterile needle on top of the sterile syringe. We'd always watch closely as she'd nudge a little water out of the syringe so it's sprinkled in the air. We'd cheer. She'd then remove the top from the Desferal vial and inject just enough sterile water into the bottle to create the chelator. Now, she had to be precise because much like most medications, it could be toxic if she mixed it incorrectly. She'd then hold the bottle between her two fingers and she'd move it side to side to make the mixture. She'd remove the needle. She would then put in the sterile needle and she would remove the Desferal from the bottle. She would then change the needles and put the butterfly needle on and then place the infusion into the pump. Marcus would stand up, squeeze his hip flap together, and she'd poke him. As they got used to the procedure, he'd take the butterfly needle and poke himself. My job was to open the Tegaderm package with two hands and present the open package with the Band-Aid sticking out to Mom and Marcus so they could remove it from the wrapper without dirtying their gloves. Mom would place the sticky adhesive covering the butterfly needle, thus keeping it secured for 12 hours. Once secured, Marcus would put the infusion pump into the sling, and we'd pull off all our gloves and put everything into the needle box. When accessed, Marcus was only allowed to play at our house and the Tainer's house. And as time went on, he could draw up his own medication and eventually conduct the entire procedure solo, just under my mom's watchful eyes. Marcus had to be poked repeatedly throughout his life for nearly a decade. The skin scarred over, making it harder and harder as years went on to actually push the needle through it. The medication didn't absorb either, and it would burn underneath his skin and ache all day. We'd rub his hips to help with absorption, and my parents practiced different angles for how to poke him each and every night. Over time, we got into a solid rhythm of chelation and blood transfusion. Our tardiness for schools lessened. We spent much less times in the hospitals in Chicago. The reduction in hospitalizations even gave mental space for my parents to figure out a schedule for one of them to always be home. My dad, now an electrician, works 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. My mom, still a nurse, worked 3:30 p.m. to midnight. Their schedules were off like this because if for any reason Marcus looked like he was becoming ill, one of them could always call into work and be home. It also allowed for Marcus to be a big brother and babysit me for 60 minutes between Mom leaving for work and Dad coming home for work. But truthfully, we were never really alone because the Tainer and the other neighbors were close by. The increased time at work allowed for them to buy a second car. The increased time at work was also vital because the chelation pumps were not covered by insurance. When one broke, they had to purchase a second for $1,100, and they always had to have two because when one was being maintenance, the other had to be in use. Remember, this was the early 2000s. Look who that is. Now, again, I want to remind everyone that this routine is just a day in our life. It went on for 10 years. It was second nature to us. It was normal. So, on one summer day, when I was 7 or 8 years old, and Marcus was around 13, during that 60-minute window, when Marcus was well enough for Mom to leave for work at 2:45 and Dad to be on his way home from work at 3 p.m., the twins got into a nothing fight. Abby took the front seat of the van and Tanya was upset. So Tanya took Abby's jelly sandal and diary and threw it into the river. In a flash of distress, Abby came sprinting down to the Valentine household and shared through tiny sobs what Tanya, her twin sister, had done. With light supervision and a mind lush with plots for movie, I suggested that we make and give Tanya a laxative brownie. After all, I spent years of my life studying my mom's technique as she prepared the chelation therapies. So when it came time to poison Tanya, I had all the tools and skills necessary to pull off the perfect laxative brownie. Yes. Marcus ended up joining in on the plan. In his words, he was monitoring for safety purposes. I sent Abby home to go get the brownie from her house. Mrs. Tanner always kept a tray of baked goods on demand for any neighborhood child that showed up at her door. Marcus and I, in preparation for the poisonous brownie, cleaned the kitchen and disinfected the countertops with alcohol. After Abby returned with the brownie, she watched as Marcus and I started to gather materials from the enormous medicine cabinet, the size of a fridge. I slid the tallest chair I could find, and Marcus held onto the back of it. Remember, I was 8 years old and a shorty. I extended my arms back and was blindly reaching for liquid-filled sterile water and regular needles. I then moved to the lower shelf and began reading labels to Marcus. I read labels out loud, and Marcus explained to me what each medication did, correcting my pronunciation along the way. He helped me sound out words and confirmed and refuted which items to hand down. I gathered a syringe, a vial of sterile water, a regular needle, an alcohol swab, mask, and gloves. I worked my way down the shelves in the medicine cabinet and read the label on the tub of laxative suppositories before handing them to Marcus. We laid out all the tools and the medicine, and with clean and gloved hands, I removed several laxative suppositories from the tub and put them in a bowl. Marcus opened the needle and attached the sterile syringe to the sterile water. He nudged the air out so that a little would fly, and we cheered. Now, only Marcus was allowed to handle the needles out of an abundance of caution. I microwave the laxative suppositories, frequently opening and closing the microwave to prevent them from burning. Every time I opened up the microwave and pulled out the bowl, Marcus would add a little bit of sterile water, and we did this repeatedly until we had a liquid. Marcus then drew up the solution and with watchful eyes handed me the needle and syringe. We flagged Abby over, and I inserted the needle and injected the liquid into the pastry. I put the cap back on the needle and placed it into the needle box, all under Marcus's watchful eyes. We put all the medical supplies back, we cleaned the kitchen, and we left the house looking better than we found it. Marcus stayed home while Abby and I trotted down the block and fed the laxative brownie to Tanya. A couple of days passed, and I had mostly forgotten about the brownie. The twins and I had moved on from the evil twin narrative and continued our summer of rescuing frogs and toads behind the house and in the river, building forts, learning Spice Girl dances in their mirror. On one non-eventful day, when I was home watching cartoons, the house phone rang. I answered it, expecting to hear one of the twins' voices, and was startled to hear my mom's voice on the other end. She said, "Come down to the Tainter's house, now." When I got there, I immediately knew we were in trouble. The moms were set up like two judges. Both twins were examining the floor tiles. Marcus was sitting next to the door and said nothing to me. Once I gently closed the door, my mom said, "Sit down." With the four of us seated, the mom started interrogating us. My mom said to me and Abby, "Did you all feed Tanya laxatives?" She point blank asked us these questions, never looking at Marcus. I finally found my voice deep within my stomach, and I said, "We all did." After muttering the word "we," it became very clear there was no we, it was just Ashley. Marcus whined that he tried to stop us and that we were using his medication like toys. Abby found her voice and said she didn't even know what laxatives were. When asked, Tanya had no recollection of ever feeling sick. In fact, none of us could actually recall when we fed Tanya the brownie. As the moms examined Tanya and tried to put a timeline on this symptomless child, I glared at Marcus for ratting me out. Why would he be a snitch? I was scanning his body and eyes for any reason why he would have told on me. And that's when I spotted the Band-Aid on his arm. Then it clicked in my brain. Morphine. or what I call truth serum. Since there wasn't, and still isn't, a dedicated treatment for sickle cell pain, to avoid or lessen the hours of writhing, soul-shattering pain, Marcus was prescribed morphine for some relief. When he was having particularly hard times with the nighttime pain, he'd take morphine and stay awake for fear that if he fell asleep, he would wake up with a 10 out of 10 severe pain crisis and have to be rushed to the hospital. So he wouldn't sleep. That and the morphine would make him itch. So sometimes he'd be too scared and too uncomfortable to sleep. During those sleepless nights on morphine, my dad would stay awake with Marcus and talk to him until he fell asleep. When my dad and Marcus would talk, they'd talk about video games and movies and comic books and tell each other stories. When it was Mom's shift of talking to Marcus on morphine, it turned into a confessional. Marcus would not only reveal his own sins, but the mischief of every other family member and friend associated with us. This happened so frequently that I coined morphine as the truth serum. No secret was safe with Marcus when he needed morphine and was alone with Mom. Furthermore, because Marcus was the one dishing everyone's secrets, he spun the story so he was never involved, and he was just an innocent bystander. The laxative brownie confession was no different. On the day we got busted for the laxative brownies, the moms issued our punishment. We were all grounded for a week. We couldn't go to the neighbor's birthday party, and we were banned from each other's house for 7 days. Although my mom was typically pretty strict, my punishment was short. I spent only a few days sitting in solitude. Marcus convinced me that he'd sweet-talked her to go easy on me. The truth is, while I was hiding and Marcus was gabbing, my mom spent those days cataloging the medical supplies to learn exactly what we had given Tanya, calling poison control to figure out if she needed to warn Mrs. Tainer about side effects, and feeling panicked that she could lose her best friend because her children tried to poison Miss Tainer's daughter. In the end, Tanya was fine. Turns out we actually denatured the medicine by microwaving them. And by the end of the week, the world was right again. Chelations continued. We still played until the sun went down, and Marcus had less hospital stays. There we go. All right, I have more props. Now, with a show of hands, how many people know what this is? There's more of you. So on November 2nd, 2005, Xjade was approved by the FDA. It's a dissolvable tablet form of Desferal. In short, you mix it with water and you drink it. During 2005, Marcus had already started hydroxyurea, but he was still receiving blood transfusions for breakthrough crisis. He started Xjade, and gone were the days of chelation therapy at home. Gone were the days of a house full of needle and syringes. Gone were the days of daily exposure to bloodborne viruses and a schedule built around a 12-hour infusion. Compliance greatly improved. Marcus's ferritin, or blood markers to measure the iron overload, dropped significantly. Safety increased with this medication. So while I share the laxative brownie story because I find it funny and we were baby geniuses, it was extremely dangerous what we did, despite all our parents' best efforts to keep us safe. Xjade still came with side effects. It wasn't perfect. You had to mix the medicine for 10 minutes. It was hard to stomach. Half of it came out in the stool. And we had to be careful when washing the cup. If you touched it, you could taste the medicine through your skin. Or if you touched it with your skin, you could taste the medicine in your mouth. But it was much better than those chelations. On March 30th, 2015, FDA approved Jadenude, a pill. An iron chelator as a pill. So I just want to remind everyone here, they say it takes 10 years and $1 billion of investment to bring drugs to market, to bring solutions. And if you can see, once we got through the creation of Desferal, we started to meet that timeline with Xjade and Jadenude. And so for people in the room here, this is happening for sickle cell disease. We've reached that point. We're going to start to see improvements. And Dari was approved for sickle cell disease in 2017. The next two big approvals happened in 2019. Gene therapies for sickle cell were approved in 2023. We're at that 10-year mark, and we're at the $1 billion of investment. So while I know that it feels hopeless sometimes because so much is going wrong in sickle cell and in the world, there's so much going right in our population. I share these stories because I want to remind you all that in my lifetime, I watched chelation therapies go from this burdensome infusion to a powder to a pill. A pill. I know it's possible, what it means to our quality of life. And I hope some of you leave here today feeling curious and inspired. Hope's not lost. Change is happening for sickle cell, but to ensure that we keep moving forward, we all must be part of the solution. Growing up, we had to go through those chelation therapies to get to the oral powder. We had to use these chelators before we could get to the next drug that was better. And each iteration got better and better and better. So today you're going to hear from people who are investing time, energy, resources, science, love, and so much more into solutions for sickle cell disease. So for the companies in the room, please keep going. Continue to accelerate the pace of change because we really need it. For the medical community present, incremental progress is still progress, and any progress improves the lives at home for many of us with sickle cell disease. For the policymakers, welcome back. Your continued support and policies are critical to the acceleration of solutions for rare diseases like sickle cell disease. And to my sickle cell people, I just want to say this out loud, that sickle cell is a family affair. Clinical trials and the promise of drug development impact everyone involved. Whether it's chosen family, acquired family, or even your hospital family, sickle cell requires a village. One person can't and shouldn't do this alone. And finally, to our family and the moms, thank you for making our life a party and loving us unconditionally, no matter what life carried with you. Thank you.